There are calls you forget by the next shift, and then there's the ones that just will not go away. You go home, you sit down, everything's quiet. But your mind's still on that call. You don't think about it because that's the job, right? But the truth is, every firefighter carries something.
Boots hit the floor. Jump in our gear. Mask, gloves, door, screaming down the street.
If you've been in the fire service long enough, there's a moment every firefighter recognizes. The tones drop, the bay doors open, the engines roll out. And somewhere on the front bumper, the federal cue winds up. That sound means we're headed toward someone's worst day. But after the call is over, when the sirens shut off and the rigs return to the station, that's when the stories really begin. I'm Derick Dodson. I'm a lieutenant at our local department here in Northwest Georgia. And this podcast is about real conversations in the fire service. The job, the brotherhood, the lessons we've learned along the way, sometimes the things we carry with us long after the sirens fade. So I've been in the fire service about 12 years now, currently serving as an engine officer, and like most firefighters listening now, this job shapes us, it molds us, and becomes part of who we are. Some funny examples of this would be always looking for exits. So anytime we go anywhere with my family, I want to know how to get out. I want to know if something happens, where are we going from here? Backing into parking spots. So at my department, we don't have any back-end bays. Everything is pull through. So I have no idea why I back into parking spots, but I do it every single time.
Force of habit.
I guess it is. So every time I go to the mall with my spouse, I'm hanging out, I'm waiting on her to get done, and all of a sudden I notice a fire extinguisher over in the corner. For some reason, I end up over there checking the date.
I've noticed something, being in restaurants or in different buildings and just kind of looking at the construction and just kind of seeing, what you think would happen if there was a fire. Your mind kind of goes through different scenarios.
Yep, it does. These are just a few of the small things that we notice. However, there's always more to the story. One of the things I've learned is that some of the most important conversations in this profession don't happen in the classrooms or during the classes or on the training ground or at conferences. They happen around the kitchen table after a call. That's where firefighters talk about what happened. We talk about what went right. We talk about what went wrong, and sometimes what stuck with us. The goal of this podcast is to bring some of those firehouse conversations out into the open. Some episodes will focus on training and leadership. Some will focus on firehouse culture and tradition. And some, like today's episode, will talk about something that every firefighter eventually deals with, and that's mental and emotional health. That's something that's important to me personally because in addition to being an engine officer, I'm also a member of our department's peer support team. The purpose of the peer support team is to help firefighters navigate the mental and emotional challenges that come with this profession. And that leads us to today's guest. Joining me today is Axel Agan. Axel and I both work for the same department here in Northwest Georgia. He serves as the director of our department's peer support team. Axel, I appreciate you coming on the very first pilot episode of Wind the Cue. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell everybody a little bit about your background in the fire service.
Well, buddy, I appreciate you having me. My name's Axel Agan. This is my 10th year at the fire department here. You were one of my senior firefighters, so that was fun. You yelled at me a lot. Hey, if anybody out there is unaware of what an apex is in relation to drills,
I remember that now.
Or drill bits, you better study up because it's important that you know what an apex is.
How many times have you needed to know that since?
Have I needed to know the name? Never. Not one time. But I use them a lot, and it's nice to be able to call it by its proper name and not that thing that holds other drill bits.
Absolutely.
So,
one of the reasons I wanted Axel to be the very first guest is because when you're talking about mental and emotional health in the fire service, it's important to have someone who not only understands the job, but who has dedicated time to helping firefighters deal with the stress that comes with this job also. So before we jump into the serious side of the conversation, let's start with a few firehouse questions. So what's the best firehouse meal you've ever had?
Oh, man, that's hard to say. Anything Pruitt cooks is amazing. We've kind of gotten away from those big, the heavy meals we used to cook, where if you ate it, you were down for the count for a couple hours. You prayed you didn't have a big call. Favorite one now is probably just the weekend breakfast we cook. There's something kind of special, communal about those, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just the regular breakfast.
Yeah, just standard eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, the whole thing.
Love it.
Yep.
All right. In contrast, the worst firehouse cook that you've worked with. Call him out right now.
I'll call him out. And I feel bad because he's not a cook. No one would know him as a cook, but he cooked this day. I was out at 2 with Eric and DeWitt, and for some reason, DeWitt was like, hey, I'm going to cook for you guys. I think I was too new. They didn't trust me to cook anything. And he power cooked some chicken sandwiches at the temperature of the sun for about 30 seconds. And they were raw and gross. And like I said, I was new, so I was sitting there with my little sandwich, and I was looking around, and I was hoping Eric was going to say something because I was going to just grin and bear it. But thankfully, Eric was like, "Hey, I'm not eating this." So
we had steaks one night that was cooked by somebody in the next room.
Yeah,
and everybody makes the joke, "Oh, just wipe his butt and walk him by the grill."
Yeah.
Well, he cooked the steaks that night, and they were blue. I mean, they weren't cooked at all.
Ice cold.
And we all sat down at the table, and we were just going to suck it up and eat them until finally he said, man, this is terrible. I got to go at it. I got to go finish it. And everybody followed him to the stove. So, yeah, it happens. All right, one more. Funniest call you have ever run?
That's tough, too, because funny is kind of subjective. A lot of my funny calls are firefighter funny, which isn't always general public.
I can see that.
Funny. I did love when Coy set up John Boy Country Home Cooking Buffet Command.
Yeah,
that was pretty funny.
And nobody could ever repeat it the same way twice.
No.
Yeah.
Or Eric Owens with who was that with him with the money shot?
Muby.
Yeah. That, which I wasn't involved in that, but the story that came off of that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
What about you? What's your funniest?
Man, I don't know. Oh, that's a tough question.
It is tough because funny's,
Yeah. Man, I don't know. I told one earlier today. We ran a possible cardiac arrest years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Me, Bachman, and I can't remember the third person. And then car 3 went. And it was over on Old Mill Road. And a neighbor had walked by. She knocked on the door and she couldn't get the patient to the door. So she looked through the window, sees the patient sitting in her chair in the living room and mouth open like she looks deceased.
Yeah.
So we get there, bang on the door, nothing. So we get irons off the engine. I hit the door. It's a steel, like housing authority door. Hit the door about 3 times, bend the door in, and then I get ready to force the door, and I'm fixing to tell Bachman to hit. And I hear the knob wiggle. So I stopped, and I said, hold on, hang on a minute. So I stopped, and we backed up, and little old lady opens the door, and she says, can I help y'all? And I said, well, somebody walked by and they thought you needed help. She said, no, I was taking a nap. And we have destroyed the door and everything.
Yeah.
So it was pretty funny.
That's a good one.
We all just hung our head and walked back to the truck.
Yeah, man, sorry about it. All this.
You're going to want to get somebody to take care of that door.
Yeah. Felt like you needed a new door anyway.
Yeah.
So.
So that's probably one that sticks out to me just because we talked about it earlier.
That's a good one.
So these moments, they're part of what makes the fire service special. So the public sees the lights and the sirens and us, of course, driving with due regard everywhere we go.
Of course.
But firefighters know that the big part of this job is the crew. The biggest part of this job is the crew and the relationship that we have inside the firehouse. Those relationships, they're often one of the things that help firefighters deal with the harder parts of this job. We have fun. We laugh. We carry on. We pick at each other. But it's not all laughter and it's not all fun. And that's just referring to some of the things that we see and we have to deal with. For a long time in the fire service, mental health wasn't something that we talked about. The culture was tough. You show up, you do your job, you move to the next call, conceal, don't feel, compress, don't stress, and you move on and you go to the next thing. And while there's a lot of strength in that mindset, we've also learned something important over time. So firefighters see things, we smell things, we hear things, we touch things that potentially in a 24-hour shift within an hour or on a single call are worse than what most people will ever experience their whole lives. And everybody knows, but serious accidents, medical calls, structure fires, traumatic injuries, death. For anyone who calls 911, that is their emergency. I wasn't on the call, but I heard about it. But as a department, we ran a call a few years ago back on Old Mill Road, and it was a single mother with a baby, and she couldn't get the lid off her sippy cup. And it's easy to think down on that, but to her, she needed to feed her baby. That was her emergency. So no matter how we perceive that situation, it's important to the person calling. So Axel, from your perspective, working with a peer support team, have you seen the culture start to shift when it comes to firefighters talking about the emotional side of this job?
Yeah, I think it's gotten a lot more open culturally to talk about. It was tough, and I think it was kind of brought on themselves. There was just an older thought process of like, I've got to be tough enough. It doesn't matter what I've seen, what I'm going through. No one else is complaining, so I'm not going to complain either. When really they were all just kind of suffering in silence in one way or another.
Yeah.
But I think, generationally it's changed. I think that's a big part of it. We've got younger guys, but also there are older guys that now aren't as afraid to mention, like, hey, that call we ran, that was pretty rough, and it's got me thinking about some stuff. And you just talk about it. It's a different world. It's very positive to watch that change happen. It's surprising, honestly, how quick it's happened because, I haven't been on the job terribly long, 10 years, but in those 10 years, it's definitely way more common to talk about things.
Yep. I've noticed that, and I think we've talked about this before, we have a new set of recruits that are at Gypstick right now.
Yeah.
And they'll be coming back before long. They'll be going on the truck. But we're actually seeing that shift in the older firemen. And maybe it's because, like you just said, the newer ones are still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
They don't want to say, this call's bothering me or whatever the case is. But I think the older ones are kind of starting to see the effects of not talking about anything for 20 years of service.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're kind of seeing, and that's kind of a shock to me.
There is a weird thing with the really young guys, too, who almost want to put up a wall because they think that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So they've seen, maybe they have an idea of what a fireman's supposed to be, how he's supposed to carry himself. And it does take some guys with a couple years on them now to be like, no, man, it's okay. Like, let's talk about it. It's normal. We're all people.
Yeah, I think that's right. One thing that comes up often when firefighters talk about stress on this job is that the calls that affect you the most aren't the ones that people expect. And sometimes it's not the biggest fire, or maybe it's not the worst wreck. Sometimes it's something smaller. A moment during a call, a smell, something somebody said, and maybe just a situation that sticks with you. So I have a story. I hadn't been here long, maybe 6 months or so when this happened, but it was in this district not far from here. And we run a cardiac arrest early in the morning, maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock. and it was for a female patient. We got on scene, and there's 50th wedding anniversary pictures, and there's pictures of their family on the wall, and found out that not long before that they had celebrated their 50th anniversary. So at some point during the night, the wife had passed away. The husband couldn't get her awake that next morning, so he went next door, called 911, and then we went out and assessed her, and she had been deceased for a while. He was in advanced stages of dementia. He didn't realize that his wife had passed in the bed. And they had this whole life together. Like I said, pictures when you walk in the door, the family, kids, grandkids, all of that. So they had this whole life together and this family, but he sat in a chair in the corner of the room and told us jokes the whole time we were there because he didn't realize what was happening. And it wasn't the physical aspect of her passing away that stuck with me, but it was just that emotional side of, and I think a lot of time that's what it is, because we've run other cardiac arrests with elderly, and the spouse is trying their best to do CPR. And we know once we get there and we assess and we see what's going on that they couldn't have been saved anyway. But the emotional side of it is now that remaining spouse has to live with the fact that maybe they didn't do enough, or they didn't try hard enough, or they didn't find their spouse fast enough. But that's kind of the emotional side. That's a little story that's always stuck with me. I run it, like I said, about 6 months after I started, and I just always remembered it.
It's funny, the pictures you mentioned, looking at the pictures, family pictures and stuff. I've had calls that were kind of similar where there's something about looking around at the family home and you know that the family dynamic won't ever be the same again. Yeah. And, that's hard. That's hard to take in.
Without getting into anything too personal, have you had experiences in a job where a call stayed with you longer than you expected? Maybe it wasn't the big obvious call, but some little small call that you didn't think would affect you. I had one similar thing. I'd been here less than a year. I was at 3, and we ran a regular. It was a guy over there off Old Mill Road, and he had stomach pains, and he always had stomach pains, and always wanted to go to the hospital and get some medicine, frequent flyer, and that's whatever. Anyway, we got there, and he was waiting on the porch for us. So we checked him out, assessed his vitals and everything, and he was fine, just had an upset stomach. And as we were leaving, his wife came out and, for whatever reason, asked me to go inside and wake up their daughter because she was going to ride in with him on the ambulance. His daughter was sleeping. It's kind of weird, but I was like, okay. She told me, go in. It's first room on the left. And I went in, and the house was a disaster. And of course, she was like, "Oh, we just had a birthday party. I just cleaned up." Before, I'm like, okay, this must have been a crazy birthday party. Anyway, went in to the room and went to wake up the little girl, and she was laying on the mattress. Mattress was on the floor, and she had roaches running all over in her hair and stuff. Wow. And that stayed with me for a while. And we thankfully went out. I told Ogle, was my officer at the time. I was like, "Hey, this is going on." He got PD out there. They got DFACs involved. But just the picture of her laying there sleeping with roaches running on her, that stuck with me for a good while. That was a bad one. And it wasn't a bad call. It was just the idea that could happen. Yeah, situation.
Yeah, weird situation.
Well, almost every firefighter I've talked to has a call like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't realize it's affecting you right then until, down the road it creeps back up. Maybe weeks or months, but could even be years down the road. But something triggers that memory. And it may be a smell. We know that smell's tied to our memory the strongest. And maybe that, or it may be something that you see. But one of the challenges with stress in the fire service is that it doesn't always show up right away, like we just said. And we as firefighters, we're really good at compartmentalizing our feelings. We're good at putting things in boxes. We just do the job, we move forward, and we do our best to get through it. But when the adrenaline's gone, and we're at the station or we're at home or we're living our lives, that's when those things start creeping back in. And we realize that the whole time we had our trauma stored in a jack-in-the-box instead of a safe. And it pops up at the worst time. When the tones drop, we focus on what needs to be done. But if you keep pushing these things aside without ever unpacking them, that stress eventually starts to show up in other ways. Sometimes it's irritability and mood swings. Sometimes it's trouble sleeping. Sometimes it's an inability to concentrate. Or we become forgetful. Or it's just feeling like we're just mentally drained all the time. Another thing I've heard many firefighters say is that sometimes the people who notice these things are family, which makes a whole lot of sense. They know us. They know how we act. They know how we feel. And they pick up on those changes first. Have you seen that in your experience or through peer support conversations?
Yeah, I think so. I think we all kind of, when we go out in the world or go to work, we put on a version of ourselves that we want the world to see. We really don't let the walls come down until we get home.
Yeah.
So the first person that's going to see a real change in you is usually going to be your family, your spouse, your kids. Why is daddy irritable? Why is daddy closing himself off, hanging out in his room by himself, or whatever? It's hard to pick up on sometimes, depending on your relationship with your guys at work. You got to have a really close relationship and be willing to go out on a limb and say, hey, buddy, I noticed you're a little off. Sometimes that's awkward. It's hard to do.
It is.
But it's important.
Well, one encouraging thing is that fire service is starting to recognize how important this is. And you touched on it a little bit earlier. And even in your 10 years, how much it's changed. More departments are starting peer support teams. We started ours in 22, I believe.
Yeah, end of 21, beginning of 22.
Yeah, so we're about 4 years in. And we've helped with other state debriefings and things like that too. But more firefighters are talking openly about the stress and the trauma, and that's always a good thing. More professionals now specialize in working with first responders. So I have spoken with a therapist a couple of times, and it is a big deal to speak to somebody who understands the career that you're in. I would find it hard to be in public safety and go to a therapist who knows nothing about it, because I always find myself wondering, do they even really understand what I'm talking about?
It'd be really tough.
All right, so from your experience as director of the peer support team, what are some things that help firefighters deal with stress that comes from our job?
Well, and it sounds cliche, but hobbies are very important. Physical exercise, if you can work your body out, it does work your mind out as well. Doing hard things with your body is very good for your brain.
That's true.
Having relationships, it's easy to shut yourself off when you're in a bad spot, when you've gone through a bad call, when you're dealing with things. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I think most people are. They tend to isolate. If you can fight that urge to isolate and surround yourself with the people in your life who obviously care about you and kind of pull yourself out of that prison, that's pretty huge. That's very helpful.
Yep, I agree with that. I know we look for the signs. We run these really bad calls, and then we come back and we try to watch everybody else. And we look for them to isolate, or maybe their mood changes or their personality changes or whatever the case is. they start showing up late, or something changes about them. We can pick up on that pretty quick, but then we find ourselves isolating. So just as important as taking care of everybody else is also making sure that you're taking care of yourself.
And that's really hard to do too. When you're the guy that's supposed to be taking care of things, it's hard to be like, I need some help too.
Yeah, that's right. But we all do.
Yeah. I mean, even therapists see therapists because they have a job that's, they're dealing with problems all day long. So everyone needs someone.
That's true.
We're pretty blessed here in that, we're a small department, so we can pick up on if someone's acting a little, little different, a little moody. But yeah, gotta watch for those signs.
All right, time for your rapid fire question round.
Oh man, okay.
Yep, you've got to answer the question. You've got to answer the question and why. So you've got to pick. You've got to pick it.
All right. I got to give a why, too?
Okay, before we wrap up, we're going to do a quick fire rapid round. Answer the question with the first thing that comes to your mind and tell me why. You ready?
Sure.
Engine or truck?
Engine. I guess because I'm on one right now.
Smoothbore or fog?
I got to say fog. I don't get the whole smoothbore mafia thing. I think fogs they're more utilitarian.
Okay. Best firehouse meal. We touched on this one earlier.
I got to go good old weekend breakfast.
All right. So, worst call, but let me elaborate a little bit. Not necessarily the worst call you've ran.
Okay.
Because we don't ask that question. That question is never cool to ask, by the way.
Right.
But the worst call that you have been dispatched to.
So you're saying the vaguest dispatch information?
Yeah, let's go with that.
All right, let me think of one. Let's see. I mean, we've gotten a bunch of, unknown problem. That's a gamut because you never know what you're going to get.
That's the dumbest call.
The unknown problem? I know.
Yes.
Yeah, that one's horrible.
Are you telling me somebody called 911 and said, send the fire department? I have no idea what's happening.
Yeah.
No.
Why do you need them? I don't know.
Just send them.
Just send them, man. We'll find out when they get here. Yeah, probably any unknown problem because it could be nothing or it could be my house is on fire and I'm trapped inside with a group of nuns and all of my foster puppies and,
Okay.
Have you gotten that a lot, by the way? I know you mentioned that a minute ago about the, what's the worst call you've ever ran? Do you get that pretty often?
Not often. A couple of times.
Yeah.
And
how do you answer that when they ask?
You don't want to know.
I've had it a few times too, and it's always weird.
Yeah. It's weird because they don't understand what they're asking.
Right.
And I usually play it off with, you don't want to know, but tell them something else.
Yeah.
Some other story or whatever. Because we know that that's not a cool question to ask.
It's such a strange thing to try to answer because you're never honest. You're never like, well, it was this horrible thing that happened.
I think in private, amongst ourselves, no issue.
Yeah, we can talk about it, but it's therapeutic when we do. But yeah, they're looking for like a weird shock factor, and there's no good way to answer the question.
Yeah. Oh, they'd be shocked.
Yeah.
All right. Last one.
Okay.
What's one thing every rookie firefighter should know?
Every rookie firefighter, they should know that they're not expected to be an expert yet. This is their time as a rookie to ask questions and screw things up and not be amazing at their job yet. So soak everything in, ask every question you can. If you're about to go train on something you just trained on 2 days before, pretend it's the first time you're doing it.
Good answer.
And ask everyone for tips and tricks and be humble.
I like that answer a lot because there was so many times I'd go to the academy for a class thinking as I'm driving down there, I'm supposed to already be a pro at this.
Yeah.
I don't want to go in there and be embarrassed. I should already be a pro.
Yeah.
And that's not the case.
No, especially when you're brand new. I mean, and there's so much stuff we have to do and be proficient at. We can't be good at everything.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't throw a ladder for a year, the next time you go to throw a ladder, you're going to look goofy at it.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It's all about practice and reps and doing things often.
Anything else before we move on?
No, but thank you for having me as your inaugural guest.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Well, as we wrap up this first episode of Wind the Q, the main things I want firefighters listening to remember is this. Every firefighter carries certain memories from this job. Some calls stay with us longer than others. The important thing is remembering that we're not carrying these experiences by ourselves. So check in on your crew. Take care of each other. And don't be afraid to talk about the things that come with this job. Axel said a while ago how therapeutic it was. And we mentioned the kitchen table at the very beginning. That is where we have our conversations. Usually around that kitchen table. Maybe during breakfast, maybe during supper when we cook and we're all sitting together. We don't always eat the same things, but we try to always spend that time together. And that's where we get a lot of that therapy from. So, Axel, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And like you said, that kitchen table or that bumper of the engine, those talks, being able to do those more openly and more frequently, that's your first line of defense. And
Yep.
if you can make it a point to do those things and really talk about things, that may be where a problem ends. But when you're closed off and you find it really difficult to do those things in those situations, that's where, you could end up having real issues down the road.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thanks to everybody for listening to the very first inaugural pilot episode of Wind the Q. Until next time, stay safe, take care of your crew, and take care of yourself.
Boots hit the floor. Jump in our gear. Mask, gloves, door, screaming